The first thing Claudia Sterling saw was the trailer. Not the man standing beside it. Not the 8-year-old girl holding a tiny orange toy traffic cone like it was something brave. Not the dents in the old gray panels that had been earned on highways. Parking lots, loading docks, and midnight shoulders where broken vehicles waited in the rain. Just the trailer. It rolled into Sterling Urban Motors' demo bay behind a worn service van. Its faded red stripe barely visible under dust. Its fenders scratched. Its work lights patched with tape. And its side door rattling like it had more stories than hinges. In a room full of polished prototypes, investor cameras, white floor lines, and engineers wearing badges on clean lanyards. Nolan Reed's rusty mobile repair trailer looked like a mistake that had taken a wrong turn. Nolan stopped the van exactly where the standby coordinator had told him to stop. He climbed out slowly, checked the wheel chock under the trailer, and looked across the demo bay at the matte white Sterling RouteLine E1 prototype electric delivery truck. It stood under industrial lights, clean and silent, with dark gray lower body accents and a charging cable coiled beside it like a museum rope. Around it moved engineers, municipal buyers, and investors who spoke in low, confident voices because launch events made everyone pretend uncertainty was impolite. Nolan was 39, a single dad, and a roadside mechanic who had learned that vehicles rarely failed politely. They failed under heat, weight, vibration, bad roads, tired drivers, and the exact conditions nobody scheduled for a perfect demo. Sophie Reed stood close to her father's leg. She had asked to come because childcare fell through at 6 in the morning. And because Nolan's only option was to bring her or lose the day's standby fee. In her hand was a tiny orange toy traffic cone from one of his old roadside kits. She carried it when she was nervous, the way some children carry dolls or stones. Nolan had offered to leave it in the van, but Sophie said the cone knew how to stand near danger without falling over. That had made him smile for the first time all morning. Now, under the sharp lights of Sterling's demo bay, she held it with both hands and watched people look at their trailer. Claudia Sterling crossed the floor with 3 executives and a cluster of engineers behind her. She was 43, billionaire CEO of Sterling Urban Motors, and famous for making industrial products look like future history before they had survived their first real winter. Her dark suit was clean enough to shame the whole service lane. Her expression changed when she reached Nolan's trailer. She looked at the open hitch, the dented gray body, the old side door, and the scratched toolbox welded to the tongue. Then she looked at Nolan. Who authorized that to be inside my demo bay? The word that came out hardest was that. A standby coordinator lifted his tablet. Roadside support subcontractor, Nolan Reed. He's on the access list. Claudia did not take her eyes off the trailer. I requested emergency technical support. Not a rolling junk drawer. A few engineers laughed before they realized Sophie was standing there. One investor smiled into his coffee cup. Nolan heard all of it. He had been underestimated in prettier rooms and dirtier ones. It did not bother him the way it used to, but Sophie's fingers tightened around the toy cone. And that changed the weight of the laugh. A child does not hear a joke about a trailer. She hears adults deciding what kind of father she has. Nolan kept his voice calm. I'm here for roadside standby. If the demo vehicle needs recovery or field diagnostics, I'm set up for it. Claudia's eyes flicked toward the trailer door. That thing is not coming near the RouteLine E1. She turned to her team. Move it outside the bay before the press walkthrough. Sophie looked up at Nolan. Her voice was small enough that only he heard it. Dad, is our trailer the kind of thing rich people laugh at before they need it? Nolan wanted to answer no. He wanted to tell her people were better than that. Instead, he put one hand on her shoulder and said, Sometimes people laugh at what they don't understand yet. The words had barely left his mouth when the RouteLine E1 clicked from across the bay. It was not loud. Most people missed it under the hum of overhead lights and the shuffle of shoes on polished concrete. Nolan did not. It was a relay sound, but slightly late. Like a door closing after the room had already gone dark. A warning tone chirped from the prototype. The white truck shuddered once, rolled 6 feet along the test lane, and shut itself down. Engineers moved toward it quickly. Marcus Vale, lead electrical systems engineer, lifted one hand and called for the diagnostic tablet. Claudia turned away from Nolan as if the trailer had stopped mattering. But Nolan kept looking at the truck, then at the trailer, then back at the truck. If you have ever watched someone judge a working tool by how ugly it looked, stay with this story. Tell me where you are listening from. Because that rusty trailer was not there to impress anyone. It was there to do what 12 engineers in a clean factory had not done yet. It was there to test the road. Nolan had built the trailer over 9 years, one bad month at a time. After Laura died in 2022, the trailer became more than equipment. It became the shop he could afford, the office he could tow, the place where Sophie did homework on a fold-down stool while he traced faults in delivery vans, food trucks, shuttle buses, and farm pickups that broke too far from anyone's comfort zone. The gray panels had dents because the world was full of tight alleys and careless forklifts. The work lights were patched because replacement housings cost money better spent on insurance. Inside, though, the trailer was not junk. It was organized like a mind that had survived by noticing patterns. There was an old analog oscilloscope bolted to a vibration-damped shelf. A portable load bank sat below it. Scarred from use, but accurate. A homemade vibration plate folded out from the floor. Built from a salvaged motor, rubber isolators, and a control dial marked in Nolan's handwriting. Thermal leads hung in loops. A relay simulator sat in a metal case with hand-labeled switches. There were harness hooks, portable battery monitors, and a custom fault recorder Nolan had assembled from parts nobody else wanted. It looked ugly to people who thought new meant better. To Nolan, it was the closest thing he had to a second language. Marcus Vale and his engineers gathered around the RouteLine E1. Same shutdown. One of them said, "No permanent fault stored." Marcus rubbed the bridge of his nose. He was 47. Tired in a way Nolan recognized. The kind of tired that comes from a problem embarrassing smart people in public. Claudia walked over with controlled urgency. "Marcus, I need an answer before the municipal buyers arrive." Marcus lowered his voice. "But the bay carried sound. We've had 12 engineers on this for 4 days. We tested temperature, battery load, drive cycle, vibration, and software response. It won't fail consistently." Nolan watched the truck's rear body settle slightly as technicians unloaded ballast cases from the cargo compartment. That detail mattered. He stepped closer, stopping outside the marked safety line. Was it fully loaded when it failed? Marcus glanced at him. "Excuse me," Nolan nodded toward the ballast. "Full route weight. Warm pack. Vibration from the rolling platform. All 3 at once." One of the younger engineers gave a short laugh. "We've tested all those." Nolan looked at the truck. Together, the engineer opened his mouth, then looked at Marcus. Marcus's expression did not change, but his silence stretched just long enough for Nolan to hear the answer. Claudia noticed the pause and hated it. "Mr. Reed, you are roadside standby. Please stand by." Nolan did not move closer. That click before shutdown, it sounds like a protective relay. But it's late. Something's lifting under load before the system knows what it lost. Marcus stared at him now. Annoyed, but listening against his will. Lifting, Nolan pointed. Not at the truck itself, but toward the harness routing near the power control bay. Connector, pin, or harness strain, not enough to fail on a bench. Enough to confuse the truck when the road shakes it while it's hot. Claudia laughed once. But this time nobody joined her quickly. "And your trailer told you that?" Nolan turned toward the rusty gray trailer. My trailer tests what happens when clean parts meet bad pavement. Sophie looked at the trailer, then back at Claudia, and lifted her toy cone a little without realizing it. Claudia's face hardened. No. We are not attaching homemade equipment to a prototype before a launch event. Nolan nodded. Then don't. He looked at Marcus. But if it fails during the public run, you'll lose the room and still won't know why. That sentence did what technical language could not. It reached the investors. It reached the municipal buyer's liaison standing near the far wall. It reached Dana Holt, the independent safety compliance auditor, who had been watching from beside the observation glass. Dana Holt stepped forward with a tablet in one hand. She was 41, practical, and calm in the way people become calm when their job is to keep ambition from outrunning safety. "Mr. Reed," she said, "can your equipment reproduce the condition without driving the vehicle?" Claudia turned sharply. "Dana, this is not necessary." Dana did not look away from Nolan. "Can it?" Nolan answered carefully. "I can simulate vibration and load against the suspect circuit while the truck is powered under supervision. I need thermal leads, harness access, and someone from electrical watching everything I touch." Dana looked at Marcus. "Is that possible without compromising the prototype?" Marcus hesitated. "Possibly. Yes. Advisable 5 hours before launch." "Debatable." Claudia stepped between them. "The trailer stays outside. We do not have time for roadside improvisation." Dana's voice stayed even. "If the vehicle has repeated unexplained shutdowns during loaded demo cycles, we also may not have time to ignore credible reproduction." The bay quieted. Claudia's executives looked at one another. Sophie leaned closer to Nolan. "Is she helping?" she whispered. Nolan kept his eyes on Dana. "She's doing her job." Dana lowered her tablet slightly. "I will authorize a limited diagnostic observation if Sterling provides temporary written access. Marcus supervises electrical contact, and no component is modified without approval." Claudia's jaw tightened. "This is absurd." Dana finally looked at her. "If his rig reproduces the shutdown under controlled conditions, this is no longer a nuisance. It is a reportable safety concern." The word safety changed the room. It always does when investors are listening. Claudia could mock rust, but she could not publicly mock safety with municipal buyers walking in that afternoon. She gave Marcus a look that seemed to blame him for physics. 10 minutes, she said. "If this becomes theater, it ends." Nolan shook his head. "I don't need theater. I need access terms in writing." Claudia stared at him. He held her gaze. "Your prototype. My equipment. Your bay. My liability if someone says I touched the wrong thing. Written access or I don't open the trailer." For the first time, Claudia did not have a quick insult ready. Dana nodded. "He is correct." 15 minutes later, Nolan had a temporary consultant access sheet in his hand. Limited to diagnostic observation under supervision. No repair authorization. No component alteration. Dana Holt witnessing. Marcus Vale supervising. It was not glamorous. It was one page on company letterhead with signatures at the bottom. To Nolan, it was armor. He folded it once and placed it on the trailer workbench where Sophie could see it. "That paper means they asked," he told her quietly. Sophie looked at Claudia. Then, at the trailer. "Good." Nolan opened the side door of the rusty gray trailer. The room saw inside for the first time. The laughter did not return. The handmade rig looked old. Yes, but not random. Cables hung in labeled loops. The scope glowed to life with a green line. The load bank fan spun up. The vibration plate unfolded from the floor on its reinforced hinge. Marcus stepped closer despite himself. "You built this." Nolan clipped a thermal lead to a test block. "Piece by piece. For EV diagnostics, for roadside diagnostics. EVs are just vehicles that learned new ways to fail." Sophie sat on a folding stool near the trailer door, safely behind the marked line, her orange cone placed on the shelf beside her like a tiny warning sign. Nolan worked with the quiet rhythm of a man who trusted his tools because he had built them when nobody was watching. He asked Marcus to identify the power control harness access point. Marcus did. Reluctantly at first, then more precisely when Nolan repeated the instruction back correctly. Dana recorded the setup. Claudia stood with her arms folded. Still angry, but not laughing now, Nolan attached the thermal leads near the harness path. Not directly to any sealed component. He connected the fault recorder to a diagnostic output Marcus approved. The vibration plate was positioned beneath a harness support bracket. Not to shake the truck violently, but to introduce a controlled frequency matching a loaded urban route over rough pavement. That won't prove anything, one engineer muttered. Nolan adjusted the dial without looking up. It might not. That's why we test. Marcus heard the answer and said nothing. The first run showed nothing. Claudia exhaled loudly, almost triumphant. Nolan did not react. He watched the scope line, the thermal reading, the load curve, and the timing of the relay. Again, he said. Marcus frowned. We just ran it. Not warm enough. They ran it again. The RouteLine E1 stayed awake. Nolan increased load within the limit Marcus approved and adjusted the vibration frequency slightly. Sophie watched her father's face, not the screens. She knew that look. It was the same look he had when listening to a customer describe a problem that only happened sometimes. Sometimes was where her father lived. On the third run, the scope line twitched. Not a failure. Not enough to satisfy a report. Just a narrow spike. Quick and sharp. Appearing exactly before the relay sound Nolan had heard earlier. Marcus leaned in. What was that? Nolan held up one hand, asking for silence. The spike appeared again. Smaller this time. Then vanished. The truck did not shut down. Claudia's face tightened. A glitch on his equipment. Marcus did not answer. He was looking at the timestamp. Nolan pointed to the fault recorder. Same pre-shutdown signature. But not enough to trip it. Dana stepped closer. Can you reproduce that spike again? Nolan nodded slowly. Yes. But the full condition needs a longer combined run. Claudia moved immediately. No. We are not extending this. Dana looked at the recorded trace. Then at Marcus. Is that spike consistent with any known pre-shutdown noise? Marcus swallowed. The whole bay seemed to wait for him. He looked at Nolan. Then at the trailer Then at Claudia. It is consistent with the anomaly we saw before the last two shutdowns, he said. The words were careful, but they still changed everything. Nolan looked at the green line fading across the old analog scope. Then he said the sentence that made the first real silence fall over the demo bay. That spike is not random. It's waiting for the road. No one laughed. Not the engineers. Not the investors. Not Claudia. Sophie looked at her toy cone on the trailer shelf and smiled just a little, as if the cone had known all along where to stand. Dana saved the trace and locked the recording. The public demo cannot proceed on the current schedule until we run the full combined stress test under documented conditions, she said. Claudia turned toward her, stunned. You are pausing a launch over a spike from a rusty trailer. Dana's reply was quiet, but it carried across the bay. No, I am pausing a launch because his rusty trailer may have reproduced the warning your cleanroom missed. The demo bay did not feel polished anymore. It still had the same white floor lines, the same bright industrial lights, the same investors standing near the observation glass with their arms folded and their phones lowered. The Sterling RouteLine E1 still looked perfect under the lights. Matte white and silent. Waiting for a launch it was no longer allowed to make. But the room had changed. The rusty gray mobile repair trailer, the one Claudia Sterling had called a rolling junk drawer, now sat with its side door open like a small workshop that had rolled into court with evidence. Nolan Reed stood beside it, one hand resting on the edge of the old diagnostic bench, while Sophie sat safely behind the marked line with her tiny orange toy traffic cone on the shelf beside her. Dana Holt replayed the captured spike on her tablet. The trace was small, almost insulting in how little it looked like a crisis. A thin jump before the relay timing shifted. Then the line settled again. But Marcus Vale had seen enough to stop pretending it was meaningless. He stood near the RouteLine E1 with his arms crossed, staring at the old analog scope inside Nolan's trailer as if the machine had spoken a language his team had forgotten. Claudia looked from Dana to Marcus to Nolan, trying to find the person in the room she could still overrule. "We are not turning a pre-launch bay into a roadside experiment," she said. Dana did not raise her voice. "We are already past that. We have a repeatable precursor anomaly." Claudia's eyes flashed. A precursor anomaly from unapproved equipment. Nolan reached for the temporary access sheet lying on the trailer workbench and lifted it just enough for everyone to see. "Approved for diagnostic observation. Signed by Sterling. Supervised by Marcus. Witnessed by Dana." He put it back down. He was not trying to embarrass her. He was protecting himself. Because men like him did not survive around companies like hers without paper. Dana stepped beside the trailer. "The next run will be documented as a controlled combined stress test. No repair. No component alteration. We reproduce the condition or we clear it. Either way, the record stays." Marcus exhaled and nodded toward his engineering team. "We need thermal rise at the harness zone, route load draw, and vibration input, within safe bench limits." One engineer frowned. "We already ran vibration." Marcus looked at him. "Not with heat and full route load together." The sentence hung there, quiet but heavy. It was the beginning of his witness switch. And everyone heard it. Nolan did not smile. He only opened a drawer in the trailer and pulled out a pair of thermal leads, a shielded clip harness, and the small relay simulator he had built from salvaged parts and patients. "Your clean room was testing symptoms one at a time," he said. "Roads don't do one thing at a time." Claudia turned away, as if refusing to dignify the line. But she did not stop the test. She could not. Dana had already started the record. Nolan worked slowly, narrating only what was necessary. Marcus approved every contact point before Nolan connected it. The thermal leads went near the power control harness path, not on sealed components. The load bank was tied into the approved diagnostic interface. The vibration plate was set beneath the harness support zone through a temporary coupling pad, so it would simulate rough pavement without damaging the prototype. The old scope glowed green. The fault recorder blinked awake. Sophie watched her father's hands move with a calm she trusted more than any badge in the room. The first combined run lasted 90 seconds. Nothing happened. Claudia's posture lifted a fraction. But Nolan did not look at her. He adjusted the vibration frequency lower, closer to the rhythm he had heard when the truck moved 6 feet before shutdown. "Again," he said. Marcus approved the range. The second run produced the spike, then a smaller echo behind it. Marcus leaned closer. "There. Same timestamp relationship to the relay delay." Dana saved the trace. Nolan checked the thermal reading. "Not warm enough yet," Claudia snapped. "You are extending the test to make your theory fit." Nolan looked at the RouteLine E1. "Not at her. No. I'm extending the test because the road doesn't fail on your schedule." The third run started with the truck powered, loaded, and still. The vibration plate hummed through the harness support bracket. Not loud, but steady, like rough pavement translated into metal. The load bank pulled within the approved route profile. The thermal leads climbed slowly. Nolan's old scope showed a stable line, then the narrow spike. Marcus's tablet showed a momentary voltage irregularity near the power control harness. The relay clicked late. This time the RouteLine E1 gave a warning chirp, then reset one auxiliary system without full shutdown. Engineers moved toward it, but Marcus lifted a hand. Nobody touches it. Dana's eyes stayed on the recording. Nolan adjusted nothing. He waited. On the fourth run, the fault showed its face. The spike jumped. The relay timing slipped. The prototype shuddered once on the rollers. And the RouteLine E1 dropped into protective shutdown exactly the way it had during the pre-launch cycle. The bay went silent so quickly, Sophie could hear the fan inside her father's load bank spin down. Nolan removed his hand from the control dial and stepped back. He did not cheer. He did not say, "Told you so." He simply looked at Dana and then at Marcus. Dana saved the trace, locked the video, and said, "Condition reproduced under controlled test." Marcus was already moving toward the harness bay. "Power down and isolate C-row connectors," he said to his team. Nolan waited until Marcus glanced back at him. "Start with C17. Marcus froze. Why C17? Nolan tapped the old relay simulator case. Your spike lands when the control harness carries root load vibration. C17 sits right where heat soak and bracket resonance meet. If a pin is lifting, it won't show cold. It won't show unloaded. It won't show on smooth vibration alone. Marcus stared at him for 1 second, then turned to the engineer beside him. Open access to C17. Document before touching. Claudia stepped forward. Marcus, be careful what you confirm in front of investors. That was the wrong sentence. Dana heard it. Marcus heard it. The investors heard it. Nolan heard it most of all, because it told him Claudia was still thinking about narrative while the truck was telling them about safety. Marcus looked at his CEO with a tired kind of respect dying in his face. "I am being careful," he said. "That is why I'm confirming it in front of witnesses." The C17 connector looked ordinary when the cover came off. Clean housing. Factory seating. No burn marks. No broken latch hanging loose like an obvious villain. That was why 12 engineers had missed it. Most dangerous faults do not announce themselves with drama. Marcus used a magnifier while Dana recorded. Nolan stood outside the safety line unless asked. The first visual inspection showed nothing. Claudia folded her arms. But she had learned not to speak too soon. Nolan asked for permission to run a low-amplitude vibration pulse with the connector exposed. Marcus approved. The vibration plate hummed again, under heat and load, with the harness bracket resonating. The top edge of the C17 connector lifted by the smallest visible amount, just enough for one pin to lose clean contact for a fraction of a second. Marcus whispered a word Nolan would not have said in front of Sophie. Then he straightened. Microlift at C17 under combined heat, vibration, and full root load. Dana repeated it for the record. Microlift at connector C17, reproduced under controlled combined stress condition. One of the younger engineers looked shaken. "We tested that connector." Marcus nodded slowly. "We tested temperature. We tested vibration. We tested load. We never tested them together under full root load." Then he looked at Nolan. And the room watched pride turn into honesty. He was right. The final silence did not come from the shutdown. It came from that admission. Claudia Sterling's entire launch bay, with its polished prototype and investor lighting, had just been corrected by a rusty trailer and a man she had tried to send outside. Dana turned to Claudia. "This is a reportable safety concern. The public launch demonstration must be paused pending corrective action, validation, and independent review." Claudia's face went still. "Paused for how long?" Dana answered with the calm cruelty of process. "Until the fix is documented and validated under field conditions. Not just clean room conditions," Marcus added. Quietly. "We need bracket redesign or connector retention change. Then, root load validation." Nolan began disconnecting his equipment, careful to leave Sterling's harness untouched. Sophie stepped down from her stool and stood beside the trailer shelf. Still holding the orange cone, she looked at Claudia, then at the engineers, then at the trailer. Nobody was laughing now. The old scope still glowed. The cables still looked homemade. The trailer still had dents. But the room had learned the difference between ugly and useless. Nolan wrapped one cable and placed it back on its hook. Claudia approached him slowly. "Mr. Reed," she said, and for the first time she used his name like it belonged in the room. "We will need your equipment available for validation." Nolan closed one drawer and turned. "With a contract?" Claudia blinked. He kept going. "Written scope. Liability protection. Payment terms. No open-ended access. No verbal promise." Dana looked almost pleased. Marcus looked like he wanted to laugh from exhaustion. Claudia glanced toward the investors. Then back to Nolan. "You understand this delay affects a municipal pilot contract worth $28 million. Nolan nodded. "Then the paperwork should be easy to justify." Sophie smiled down at the tiny cone in her hand. By evening, Sterling Urban Motors had issued a controlled statement. The public demo was delayed to complete additional field condition validation after a reproducible protective shutdown condition was identified. It was polished language, but it was still the truth. The municipal buyers were not thrilled, but Dana's involvement helped them trust the pause more than they would have trusted a failed launch. Investors asked hard questions about test protocol. Claudia did not lose her company, but she lost something important: sole discretion over launch readiness. The board required an independent field validation review before RouteLine E1 could enter the municipal pilot phase. Marcus was placed in charge of technical correction with Dana oversight. Claudia would still speak at launches, but she would no longer decide alone when safety was ready for the stage. The next morning, Nolan returned to the plant without Sophie, who was back at school, and found a formal agreement waiting in a conference room. Emergency consultant fee upgraded to $18,000. 12-month field diagnostics contract worth $240,000. Paid monthly, with clear limits, insurance language, and attribution for the mobile combined stress validation method based on Nolan's trailer rig. There was also a separate licensing discussion pending legal review if Sterling adapted the rig concept into its official field test protocol. Nolan read every page. Then he called an attorney he trusted from a fleet dispute years earlier. He did not sign until the attorney reviewed it. Poverty had taught him urgency. Fatherhood had taught him caution. Claudia arrived halfway through the meeting. She looked tired, less polished than before, but not broken. "Mr. Reed," she said, "I owe you an apology." Nolan looked at her over the contract. "You owe my daughter one too." The room went still. Claudia's face tightened, then softened by force of truth. "Yes," she said. "Edu?" Nolan nodded once. "Then tell her when she's here." "Not through me." Claudia accepted that without argument. It was the first thing she had accepted from him without trying to control it. 2 weeks later, after the corrected C-17 retention design passed the field condition validation, Sophie stood in the demo bay again. This time, no one laughed at the rusty gray repair trailer. The side door was open, the old scope secured, the cables labeled, the vibration plate folded neatly against the floor. Claudia walked over without executives around her and lowered herself slightly so she could speak to Sophie. "Not over her. I laughed at your father's trailer," she said. "I was wrong. It helped us find something important before people got hurt." Sophie held the tiny orange cone against her chest. "It's not junk," she said. Claudia nodded. "No, it is not." Nolan watched his daughter absorb the apology. He knew she might not remember every technical detail when she grew older. She might forget C-17, load banks, vibration frequency, and municipal pilots. But she would remember a powerful woman looking her in the eye and admitting that the things she mocked had mattered. That was worth more than Nolan expected. He had wanted the contract, the stability, the chance to keep his mobile business alive. He had not realized how badly he wanted Sophie to see that dignity could survive being laughed at. The first consultant payment cleared 3 days later. Nolan did not buy a new trailer. He replaced the cracked marker lights, repaired the side door latch, installed a safer heater for winter calls, and bought Sophie a better folding stool for the inside corner. The gray panels stayed dented. The faded red stripe stayed faded. He cleaned the trailer, but he did not make it pretty. Laura's voice came back to him one evening while he was tightening a new light housing. Pretty tools don't save people. Useful ones do. He had not said that line in years. When he finally said it aloud, Sophie was sitting nearby, putting reflective stickers on the handle of her toy cone. Mom said that she asked. Nolan nodded. She did. Sophie climbed into the trailer and placed the tiny orange cone on the shelf beside the analog scope. Then it should stay here, she said. Nolan looked at the cone, small and bright against the old gray equipment. For safety, he asked. For when people forget, she said. He smiled, but his throat tightened. Forget what? Sophie looked at the trailer, then at him. That useful things don't have to look rich. Nolan stood in the open side door with the evening light behind him and rested one hand on the frame. That's a good thing to remember. Months later, Sterling's revised RouteLine E1 completed its municipal pilot without a shutdown. The validation protocol included field condition combined stress testing before release. And Nolan's trailer rig was cited internally as the model that exposed the gap. His business changed. But he did not. He still answered roadside calls. He still taught Sophie to stand behind cones and never trust a quiet shoulder at night. He still listened for clicks other people missed. And when customers asked why a company like Sterling needed a rusty trailer to find a fault 12 engineers had missed, Nolan never told it like a revenge story. He told it like a road story. He would say the engineers were smart. The clean room was useful. The prototype was impressive. But the road is a different kind of teacher. It shakes parts while they are hot. It loads systems while people are tired. It asks questions in combinations. That was all his trailer had done. It brought the road into the room. And on the shelf inside the rusty gray mobile repair trailer, next to the old analog scope and the hand-labeled relay box, a tiny orange toy traffic cone stayed in place, bright as a warning and small as a promise. The trailer did not need to look important anymore. It had already proven it was.